Daniel Whitmore buried his wife 14 years ago, grieved her, spoke at her memorial, and wore his wedding ring long after the world moved on. But when a tourist's photo from an Argentinian market went viral, revealing Laura Whitmore, alive, older, and smiling, everything he thought he knew about her death unraveled in an instant. On the morning of October 17, 2009, the small town of Asheville, North Carolina, woke up to the kind of chill that signals the start of true autumn. The air was crisp, leaves covered sidewalks in shades of amber and rust, and the Whitmore house at the end of Lakeview Street stood as peacefully as ever. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss. But inside, something was deeply wrong. Daniel Whitmore, a 36-year-old high school teacher, claimed he had gone for a jog around 6 a.m., just as he did every Saturday. It was part of his routine. 2 laps around the lake, headphones in, same hoodie and sneakers every time. When he returned home around 7:15 a.m., he noticed something strange. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, his wife Laura would already be up, either reading on the porch or making coffee in the kitchen. But that morning there was no sign of her. The coffee pot was empty. The porch was bare. Her favorite throw blanket remained folded on the couch, untouched. He walked through the house, calling her name. Upstairs, their bedroom was neat, the bed made, and her side untouched. He found her purse sitting on the kitchen counter with her wallet and keys inside. Her phone, still on silent mode, buzzed with notifications. Her car was parked in the driveway, undisturbed. No notes, no messages, no trace of struggle. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. By 9:01 a.m., Daniel called 911. Police arrived quickly, combing through the house for signs of a break-in or foul play. Nothing seemed out of place. No broken windows, no forced doors, no muddy footprints. Laura's personal items were all still there, and the home security system hadn't registered any unusual activity overnight. Officers questioned Daniel thoroughly, taking him through every moment of his morning. He was cooperative, emotional, and appeared genuinely confused. He told them about Laura's habits, her mental state, their recent conversations. According to him, things had been normal, maybe even happy. As hours passed, a missing person report was filed, and search efforts began. Flyers with Laura's photo were distributed around town. Volunteers gathered to search nearby woods and trails. Dogs were brought in to pick up her scent, and drones were deployed to cover larger areas of dense forest. Still, nothing. The town buzzed with speculation. Laura was well known and well liked. She worked part-time at a local bookstore, often stayed late chatting with customers about her favorite mystery novels. People described her as gentle, thoughtful, a little shy. No enemies, no drama. Everyone wanted to help, but nobody knew where to start. Days turned into weeks. With each passing sunrise, hope dimmed. Reporters began to circle. Laura's face appeared on the local news, then regional broadcasts. Interviews with Daniel were aired where he pleaded for help, his voice cracking as he described the pain of not knowing. He appeared exhausted, aged, and hollow. Still, something didn't sit right with everyone. Quiet whispers grew into louder suspicions. If she didn't leave on her own, and if there was no sign of an intruder, who else could be responsible? As with most cases involving missing women, the focus eventually shifted to the husband. Investigators dug deeper into Daniel's past. They looked through his phone records, financial accounts, emails, and searched the house again, this time more carefully. They found nothing of note. No hidden debts, no suspicious messages, no history of violence. A few disagreements with Laura surfaced in friends' testimonies, arguments over children, money, her desire to move closer to her sister in Virginia, but nothing alarming, nothing that screamed motive. Forensic teams checked the house with luminol, searched the backyard, and brought cadaver dogs into the basement. Still, they came up empty. Surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses didn't show Laura leaving on foot or in a car. The timeline remained narrow and frustratingly clear. Sometime between 6 and 7:15 a.m., Laura Whitmore disappeared. Laura's family was devastated. Her sister Claire flew in from Richmond and became the public voice for the family, urging anyone with information to come forward. Claire believed something had happened to her sister, and she didn't hesitate to point a finger at Daniel in private conversations. To her, Laura wouldn't vanish voluntarily. She had too many plans, too much to live for. Laura had just started attending pottery classes, joined a book club, and was planning a trip to Maine with Claire in December. Nothing about her behavior hinted at a woman planning to disappear. The search continued for months. Divers checked nearby lakes and rivers. Anonymous tips trickled in, none credible. The reward fund grew thanks to donations from the community, but no one ever came forward with meaningful information. Over time, the case slowed. Investigators had no leads, no suspects, and no new information. 2 years later, with no body and no signs of life, Laura was declared legally dead. Her disappearance was filed away as a cold case. Daniel inherited her life insurance policy, sold the house, and quietly moved to another town, trying to leave behind the whispers and the stares that followed him everywhere. Though never charged with a crime, he remained under the cloud of suspicion. People in Asheville remembered the story. They remembered Laura's eyes from the posters. They remembered how her husband looked on television. And they remembered that no one ever found out what happened to her. For most, it became just another unsolved mystery. A woman who vanished. A husband who might have known more than he admitted. A town that stopped looking because they ran out of places to search. But the truth was still out there, buried beneath layers of silence, decisions, and one morning that changed everything. 4 years after Laura Whitmore's disappearance, the house on Lakeview Street had changed hands. Daniel Whitmore no longer lived there. After the official declaration of Laura's death in 2011, he sold the property, packed up what little he hadn't already boxed away, and moved 2 hours east to Winston-Salem. There, he lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment, worked as a substitute teacher, and kept to himself. His once warm, confident personality had faded into something quieter, more reserved. Neighbors saw him as polite, but distant. He never spoke about the past. Meanwhile, the house that had once been filled with the scent of Laura's homemade granola and the sound of her favorite jazz records was now owned by a couple in their late 30s, the Martins, who had plans to renovate the entire interior. The house was structurally sound but outdated. By 2013, they'd updated the kitchen, refinished the floors, and modernized the bathrooms. The last project on their list was the basement. The basement had always been somewhat of a mystery. The door had a sticky lock, the air was musty, and the lighting was poor. The previous owner, Daniel, had barely touched it, leaving behind only a few dusty shelves and an old water heater. When contractors arrived to begin demolition, they noticed something unusual behind one of the walls. A faint draft seemed to be coming from a small crack where the drywall didn't quite meet the floor. Curious, the crew removed a section of the wall, only to uncover a narrow crawl space that wasn't listed on any blueprints. It was small, barely enough for one person to crawl through, and filled with cobwebs, dust, and old insulation. But what caught their attention were the objects inside: a woman's scarf, a pair of worn ballet flats, a faded paperback novel, and a coffee mug with the words "Best Day Ever" printed on it. The items were neatly placed, not randomly tossed. The contractors stopped work immediately and called the homeowners, who then notified the police. When officers arrived, they treated the space like a potential crime scene. Everything was photographed, catalogued, and carefully removed. No blood, no bones, no hair. Just a collection of everyday items that clearly belonged to a woman. A forensic analysis later confirmed what investigators suspected. These items had belonged to Laura Whitmore. Her fingerprints were found on the mug and book. DNA testing on a strand of hair caught in the scarf confirmed a match. The discovery reignited the case overnight. Reporters were back. Camera crews filmed from the street. Headlines read, "New evidence in cold case of missing Asheville woman." Forensic teams returned to the property and combed through the crawl space again, this time with cadaver dogs and portable X-ray scanners. They found nothing more. Detectives re-examined Daniel's original statements. He had said he never used the basement. That seemed plausible, but now it raised questions. Had someone else entered the house to place those items? Or had Daniel hidden them himself? The timeline was too tight. If the items were placed there on the day of her disappearance, it meant someone had access to the house, and enough time to create that hidden cache without being noticed. Daniel was brought in for questioning. He looked older, tired, and more guarded than before. He denied knowing anything about the crawl space or the items found inside. He insisted he never used that part of the house and had no reason to hide Laura's belongings. Investigators pressed him, but he remained calm and consistent. Without fingerprints or surveillance footage showing him accessing the crawl space, they had nothing to hold him on. The evidence was circumstantial. Strange, yes. Suspicious, absolutely. But still, not enough to make an arrest. Experts weighed in publicly. Some criminologists believed the hidden items suggested guilt. Why else would someone tuck away personal effects unless to create a false narrative? Others thought it might have been staged by someone else entirely. Someone who wanted to keep the mystery alive, or worse, throw the investigation off course. Laura's sister, Claire, spoke to reporters again. She was visibly shaken. The discovery made her feel like her sister had been in that house longer than anyone realized. She wondered aloud if Laura had been hiding, or if she had been held there, unable to call for help. Theories began to multiply online. Podcasts re-examined every detail of the case. Some amateur sleuths even speculated that Laura had staged her own disappearance and left the items later to stir confusion or guilt. The police received dozens of new tips, but none led anywhere. Several claimed to have seen Laura in different states, Tennessee, Georgia, even Texas, but no sighting could be confirmed. A few former classmates of Laura's contacted the police saying they thought the crawl space discovery seemed too neat, too curated. One even said it looked like a message. But a message to whom? In the absence of concrete answers, suspicion settled once more on Daniel. He wasn't arrested, but he was scrutinized again in the court of public opinion. His quiet demeanor, once seen as grief, was now viewed through a lens of potential deceit. Every word he had spoken years earlier was reanalyzed. Every tear, every pause, every gesture was interpreted. And yet, there was still no evidence that he had done anything wrong. Daniel returned home after questioning and stayed inside for weeks. He stopped answering phone calls. The blinds remained shut. Former colleagues at the school said he didn't return to work. Neighbors reported seeing food deliveries left untouched on the porch for days. What the police couldn't ignore, however, was how deliberately those items had been placed in the crawl space. They weren't hidden in haste. They weren't buried or destroyed. It almost looked like a shrine, as if someone wanted Laura to be remembered, or found, but only partially. And perhaps that was the most chilling part. Someone had taken the time to create that scene, knowing it would eventually be discovered. Despite the renewed attention, the case once again stalled. No new leads, no witnesses, no breakthroughs. The house was eventually sold again, this time to an older couple who wanted nothing to do with the story, and Daniel, forever marked by the shadow of his wife's disappearance, continued living in quiet isolation. The public believed what it wanted to believe. Some thought he had gotten away with something dark. Others believed he was a grieving husband caught in a cruel, unsolvable mystery. But one thing was now clear. Laura Whitmore had been in that house longer than anyone thought. Or at the very least, someone had gone to great lengths to make it look that way. And whoever that person was, they had remained undetected for nearly half a decade. In early spring of 2023, Daniel Whitmore was living what most would consider a ghost of a life. 14 years had passed since Laura vanished. He was now in his early 50s, grayer, quieter, and largely forgotten by the media and the world outside his apartment. He spent most of his time alone, reading or walking the same city blocks day after day. The once promising teacher and devoted husband had become a shadow. A man defined by the absence of his wife and the questions that had never been answered. That March, Daniel began planning a small getaway to distract himself from the date that haunted him every year, the anniversary of Laura's disappearance. It had become a painful ritual, marked by long nights, recurring dreams, and the kind of hollow silence only those who've lost someone without explanation can truly understand. He didn't want to travel far, just enough to break the pattern. While researching destinations, he stumbled across a travel blog called Wander Atlas. The site featured articles from photographers and solo travelers around the world, showcasing hidden gems and local stories. Daniel clicked through a post titled, "Markets of Buenos Aires, the Soul of San Telmo." It was filled with colorful photos of cobblestone streets, antique stalls, and smiling vendors. He admired the way life seemed to spill into the streets, so different from the gray quiet he lived in. He scrolled slowly, letting the images pull him into another world. And then, midway through the post, he stopped. One photo showed a wide shot of a busy plaza with handmade jewelry, pottery, and embroidered fabric spread across tables. A cluster of people wandered through, browsing items. But in the back right corner of the image, nearly obscured by the crowd, stood a woman with dark hair pulled into a low bun. She was facing slightly away from the camera, wearing a loose cream-colored blouse and linen pants. Her left hand rested on a table, her profile caught in a mid-conversation moment. Daniel's heart slammed in his chest. He zoomed in. The woman's face was older but unmistakably familiar. The shape of her jaw, the slope of her nose, the small scar above her lip that she'd gotten from falling off her bike in college. It was all there, Daniel stared at the screen for minutes, then hours. He dug out one of the few photos of Laura he still kept, taken during a vacation in Vermont. He placed it side by side with the screen. His hand shook. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was her. He read the caption. The photo had been taken 6 months earlier by a freelance photographer named Claire Mooney, who contributed regularly to the blog. The blog's contact page listed an email address. Daniel wrote immediately, explaining that he had seen someone he believed was his missing wife in the photograph. He didn't include too many details, just enough to convey urgency. Claire Mooney responded within a day. She remembered the photo and confirmed it was taken in October 2022 in San Telmo, a neighborhood in Buenos Aires, known for its markets and expat community. She agreed to share the original high-resolution image and even included a few extras taken during the same afternoon. In 2 other shots, the same woman appeared, one walking away with a bag in hand, and another, clearer photo that showed her from the front, though partially hidden by sunglasses. But the scar was visible. So was a familiar necklace, a small, gold pendant Laura had worn nearly every day. Daniel took the photos to local authorities, who forwarded them to the FBI. At first there was skepticism. Missing person sightings were reported all the time, and most were cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking. But when facial recognition software ran a scan, the probability score was high, too high to ignore. The FBI contacted Interpol and passed the lead to Argentine authorities. Quietly, without tipping off media or the public, they launched a search through local records, immigration databases, and residence permits. Within 3 weeks, they found a woman named Elena Vargas, living in the outskirts of Tigre, a small town on the edge of Buenos Aires. She was registered as a permanent resident, owned a modest pottery studio, and had no criminal record. She paid taxes, rented a small home, and kept a low profile. Neighbors described her as friendly but private, always polite, often alone. Agents approached carefully. When they knocked on her studio door, she opened it herself. She didn't run. She didn't protest. When they asked if she was Laura Whitmore, there was a long pause. Then she nodded once. Quietly, without emotion, she said yes. Authorities confirmed her identity through fingerprint records and a DNA sample. 14 years after she had vanished without a trace, Laura Whitmore was alive. The news was not released to the public right away. Investigators wanted to understand the full story before the media could descend. Laura agreed to speak with officials in a closed setting. She was calm, articulate, and showed no signs of mental distress or confusion. What she revealed left everyone stunned. She explained that in 2009, she had decided to disappear. She said her marriage, while not abusive, had become suffocating and emotionally restrictive. She felt controlled, isolated, and unseen. There had been no major fights or incidents, just years of slowly losing her sense of self. She wanted to leave but didn't believe she could do it through conventional means. She feared the fallout, the judgment, the consequences. So she planned. Over the course of a year, she gathered cash, documents, and a new identity. She studied travel routes and researched how to avoid detection. She even timed her disappearance to coincide with Daniel's weekly jogging routine, knowing she'd have a small window. She left her purse and phone to create the illusion of an interrupted moment, then walked into the woods behind their house, changed clothes, and never looked back. The crawl space items had been planted during a return trip to the area, she admitted. She said she wanted investigators to believe she had been taken or harmed, something that would keep them from looking too far away. It was, in her words, a way to buy time and secure distance. She flew out of the country within days, using a fake passport obtained online, and settled first in Uruguay before moving to Argentina under the name Elena Vargas. There, she built a quiet, self-sustaining life. She never contacted family, never made friends from home, and never left behind a digital trail. When asked if she regretted it, she said no. For investigators, the case was closed. She had broken no laws that warranted extradition. She had the right to disappear. But for Daniel, the truth was as shocking as it was devastating. Laura Whitmore had not been taken. She had not died. She had simply chosen to vanish. And for 14 years, Daniel had mourned a ghost who had never been lost at all. News of Laura Whitmore's discovery didn't remain secret for long. Despite the authorities' best efforts to keep the details contained, a leak made its way to a small investigative podcast focused on missing persons. Within days, the headline appeared across every major media outlet. Missing woman found alive in Argentina 14 years later. The story spread rapidly. Talk shows, documentaries, and online forums exploded with speculation and outrage. For many, it was a miracle. For others, it was a betrayal. In Asheville, where Laura had once been known as a kind neighbor and avid volunteer, reactions were mixed. Some were relieved she was alive, but more felt unsettled. People had searched for her. They had volunteered. Time, money, and emotional energy. Candlelight vigils had been held in her name. Her family had grieved her. Her husband had lived under suspicion and shadow, and now it turned out she had been alive all along, choosing silence over truth. Daniel. Whitmore, meanwhile, was numb. When the FBI told him she had been found, he didn't speak for several minutes. They showed him the photos, confirmed her identity, and relayed her statement that she had left by choice. He listened without expression. No questions, no tears. Just a quiet, unreadable stare. After the agents left, he sat alone in his apartment for hours, blinds drawn, the dim afternoon light barely illuminating the room. There were no answers that could make it make sense. The next morning, Daniel opened his laptop and saw her face everywhere. The same face he had once kissed goodnight for 10 years, now filling news feeds and thumbnails. Headlines dissected her motives. Psychologists weighed in, some calling it a case of dissociative identity trauma, others labeling her behavior selfish and cruel. Documentarians pitched deals. Talk shows requested exclusive interviews. And yet, Laura remained silent. She gave no public statement, no interviews, and made no effort to contact Daniel or her family. But that silence only intensified the questions. Investigators reopened her file, not to charge her, but to understand how she had evaded detection for so long. Her departure had been methodical. She had emptied a personal savings account slowly over 18 months. She used cash for purchases and avoided all known associates. The fake passport she used had been expertly crafted, possibly by a black market ring operating in South America. She never contacted her family, never accessed old email accounts, and used no traceable social media. Experts in fugitive behavior were astonished by how effectively she had vanished. Public opinion grew increasingly divided. Some called her a hero for reclaiming her autonomy and escaping a life she saw as imprisoning. Others called her a manipulator, who weaponized disappearance to punish the people closest to her. Forums erupted into debate. Commenters accused her of emotional cruelty, while others argued she owed no one an explanation. Her sister, Claire, released a brief statement expressing relief but also pain. "We mourned someone who was never gone," she wrote, "and now we don't know who she is anymore." Daniel refused all interview requests. He didn't attend press conferences. He didn't write a memoir or appear on camera. He declined even the offer to speak with Laura privately. When asked why, he simply said, "I don't think there's anything left to say." He began therapy again, though progress was slow. He struggled with the knowledge that for over a decade, every tear he had shed was for someone who had chosen to disappear. That every anniversary spent in mourning was matched by a birthday, a market day, or a quiet coffee in a life she'd built elsewhere. He revisited old memories, trying to see what he had missed. He combed through their final months together, searching for cracks in conversations, changes in her behavior. There were signs: withdrawal, distraction, avoidance, but he had written them off as stress. Now they played back in his mind on an endless loop, each moment a reminder of what he hadn't seen. Media outlets speculated endlessly about whether Daniel had somehow driven Laura to leave. Though authorities found no evidence of abuse or mistreatment, the court of public opinion wasn't so easily convinced. A man who had once been portrayed as a grieving husband was now cast as a possible emotional oppressor. Armchair psychologists dissected their marriage, drawing conclusions from old photographs and yearbook quotes. But Daniel didn't respond to any of it. He let the world make up its mind without him. In Argentina, Laura lived quietly. Local journalists attempted to reach her, but she declined interviews. She closed her pottery studio temporarily and avoided public places. Neighbors noticed she began to keep her curtains drawn. Some recognized her from news reports. Others only knew her as the quiet artist who never stayed out late and paid her rent on time. She remained as much of a mystery as she had been during her years of absence. Her reasons, though articulated in a single interview with authorities, were still viewed by many as inadequate. To the world, she had staged a vanishing act that had cost others years of pain. Questions lingered about legality. Technically, Laura had not broken any major laws. It's not illegal to disappear voluntarily. She hadn't stolen anyone's identity. Her alias had been fabricated rather than assumed. She hadn't faked her death, though her silence had certainly encouraged that conclusion. The closest authorities came to pursuing charges involved the fraudulent passport, but due to jurisdictional gaps and statutes of limitation, no arrest was made. She was, in the eyes of the law, free, but freedom didn't mean absolution. For those left behind, closure was complicated. Laura's parents, both in their 70s, were reportedly too shaken to speak publicly. Friends who had attended her memorial services found themselves questioning their memories, their grief, and the sincerity of her former life. Claire stopped returning media calls and declined to visit her sister in Argentina. When asked in an interview if she would ever forgive her, she replied, "You can't forgive someone who hasn't apologized." Back in North Carolina, Daniel's life remained quiet. He retired from teaching and moved into a rural cottage outside the city. He grew tomatoes in the backyard and adopted a stray cat. He read books but stopped following the news. He never spoke of Laura again, even when asked by the few remaining people in his life. To him, she had become someone else entirely, someone he had never truly known. And still, the story refused to fade. Books were written. Podcasts dissected each year of her absence. A documentary team followed the timeline step by step, from the morning she disappeared to the market photograph that unraveled everything. But no one could offer a satisfying conclusion, because the truth wasn't simple. It was layered, raw, and deeply human. Laura Whitmore hadn't been stolen, buried, or murdered. She had been alive, breathing, creating, and choosing a different life under a different name. And in doing so, she left behind a trail not of clues, but of heartbreak. And that heartbreak, more than any twist or revelation, was the most unforgettable part of the entire case. The story of Laura Whitmore's disappearance and rediscovery faded from headlines faster than it had emerged. After the initial frenzy of news coverage, interviews, and speculation, the media cycle moved on. New tragedies, fresh scandals, and updated mysteries took the spotlight. But for the people directly affected, those whose lives had been twisted by the ripple effect of Laura's vanishing, the aftermath continued quietly, without closure or clarity. Daniel Whitmore lived his days in near isolation. He had sold the house he and Laura once shared within weeks of the confirmation that she was alive. He couldn't bear the sight of it anymore. The empty front porch, the small garden she once tended, the attic still filled with boxes of books and old photographs. Every corner of that home held memories that no longer felt real. It had been a shrine to someone who hadn't been dead, but had simply chosen not to return. He moved to a small cottage 40 miles north, tucked near a state park. There he filled his time with long walks, simple meals, and books he rarely finished. He avoided the internet, turned down all interview offers, and spoke to only a few trusted friends. Occasionally, a letter would arrive from someone who had read his story. Most were sympathetic, strangers expressing sorrow for what he had endured. A few were cruel, accusing him of driving his wife away or failing to understand her pain. Daniel never responded to any of them. He kept them in a drawer, unopened, unable to decide if they were worth burning or saving. He thought often about the years he had spent in mourning, about the birthdays he'd marked alone, the anniversaries spent placing flowers at the edge of the woods, the nights he had woken up from dreams where she was calling his name. The realization that all of it had been rooted in a lie didn't bring anger. It brought a strange, hollow confusion. She had made a choice. She had walked away. And while he could try to understand her reasons, he would never fully grasp the decision to leave without a word. There had been no letter, no clue, no goodbye. For Laura, life in Argentina continued under careful obscurity. Though her name had been reattached to her identity, she insisted on remaining out of the public eye. She stayed in Tigre, refusing to return to the United States or reconnect with her family. She told authorities she felt no desire to go back to a place where she had never felt like herself. She didn't grant interviews, didn't write a memoir, and turned down every offer to explain her story further. People in town grew used to her presence, but never truly knew her. She reopened her pottery studio briefly, but customers dwindled after the media exposure. Some locals whispered that they'd seen her crying alone in the back of the shop. Others claimed she laughed more than anyone expected. The truth, as always, lived in the quiet moments no one could capture. She lived a life of routines, morning tea, long walks along the river, evenings listening to the same jazz records she had once played in Asheville. But something had changed. She was free, yes, but no longer invisible. And with that came a weight she had not anticipated. The questions never stopped, even from herself. Why hadn't she left the normal way? Why had she orchestrated her exit like a crime scene? Why hadn't she thought about the pain she would cause, not just to Daniel, but to her parents, her sister, the community that had searched for her? She had told herself for years that she'd had no other choice. That silence had been her form of survival. But now, faced with the truth in the mirror each day, she found herself less certain. She hadn't expected to be found. She had thought the world would forget her face. And yet, a single photograph in a crowded market had unraveled the life she had so carefully built. In North Carolina, the town slowly returned to normal. The bench at the park with Laura's name carved into it was left untouched, a quiet monument to the years she had been presumed dead. The local library, which had once hosted annual readings in her memory, quietly stopped mentioning her name. Her sister, Claire, moved to a different city, severing what little connection she still had to the past. People whispered about the story occasionally, especially when a new neighbor moved in, or when a cold case documentary aired on TV. But with time, even the most shocking stories fade. One night, nearly a year after the truth came out, Daniel stood at the edge of a lake, near his new home. The wind rustled through the trees, and the water glimmered in the moonlight. He held a box in his hands, small, wooden, and worn at the edges. Inside were mementos he had saved from their marriage, a birthday card she had written in their second year together, a pressed flower from their wedding day, a note she had left in his coat pocket one rainy morning. These were the final pieces of a life that no longer felt like it belonged to him. He opened the box and one by one let the items fall into the water. They floated briefly before sinking, swallowed by the quiet dark. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, letting the silence fill the space where memories had once lived. Elsewhere, Laura sat in her studio, shaping a piece of clay on the wheel. Her hands moved rhythmically, the soft spinning of the wheel the only sound in the room. She didn't know what she was making. It didn't matter. The act itself was enough. She had no plans for the future, no goals to reach. She lived day by day, unsure of whether she had escaped something or created a different kind of prison. The world had given their story a headline, a summary, a label. But the truth didn't fit into neat boxes. It was messy, uncomfortable, and filled with silence. No one would ever fully understand why Laura left, or why Daniel stayed. No documentary, no podcast, no viral thread could capture the weight of the years they had spent apart. In the end, there were no reunions, no letters exchanged, no final phone calls, just two people, separated by time, geography, and choices that could never be undone. They lived out their lives in different corners of the world, both marked by a story that would never be truly finished. And somewhere in a drawer, tucked beneath a stack of travel photos, sat the image that had changed everything. A photo taken by accident, one ordinary afternoon in a busy market where the past and present collided in a single frame.